It started like most HOA nightmares do, with a letter. Not a friendly knock, not a neighborly chat, just a self-important envelope stuffed with language that screamed power trip and passive-aggressive authority. The envelope bore the official HOA crest, a logo that looked like it belonged on some ancient Roman shield rather than the front porch of a lakeside community. I opened it, already knowing what it was about. My boat. A sleek vintage cruiser I'd spent 2 years restoring, docked neatly in the corner of my own property where the shoreline curved just so, creating a perfect cradle of water. According to the HOA, my boat was an eyesore, unauthorized, and in violation of community aesthetic standards. They demanded its removal within 14 days or I'd face escalating fines. The irony? They had no idea that not only was my dock legally independent of HOA jurisdiction, but I owned the very body of water their rules were referencing. Literally, I held the deed to the lake. And more than that, I held the deed to the narrow parcel that their precious little community clubhouse sat on. A detail they never bothered to verify. You see, a decade earlier, when I bought the lakeside lot as a foreclosure from the county, I didn't just acquire the dilapidated cabin on the hill I secured legal ownership of the adjacent lake rights, and because of a clerical error in an old plat map, I also took title to a sliver of shoreline that the original HOA had used as the foundation for their clubhouse without proper transfer, lease, or permission. I discovered all this after buying the property and spending months going through the old land records. But I never flaunted it. I never threw it in anyone's face. I just wanted peace. My boat was moored where it belonged. On water I owned. Near land I paid taxes for. But HOAs never stop at their own fences, do they? Karen, the president of our particular flavor of dictatorship, was the sort who patrolled with a clipboard and binoculars. She'd wave at you on the road and then write you up for your garbage bins being out past 8 a.m. Her letter was just the beginning. A week later, I got another one. This one said that multiple complaints had been received. Funny how they all sounded like they were written by the same person. They now claimed the boat not only broke aesthetics codes, but obstructed community access, which was flat out false. My dock was entirely on my land, my boat tied within my shoreline, with no interference to any community function. But the HOA didn't operate on logic, it ran on perception and control. So Karen escalated. First came the warning signs, bright yellow laminated placards zip-tied to my dock posts reading pending HOA violation, unauthorized vessel. Then came the visits. Karen showed up twice, once with another board member in tow, both dressed like they were on a scouting mission in enemy territory. I calmly explained the situation, that they had no jurisdiction, that my property was exempt, that the boat wasn't going anywhere. She didn't listen. Instead, she stood on the edge of my dock, pointed at my boat like she was issuing a warrant, and declared, "You'll be fined every day until this is resolved." I responded with a calm smile and a single word. Okay. I wasn't interested in fighting. Not yet. But I made copies of every letter, recorded every visit, and sent emails summarizing each interaction to myself. I knew where this was going, and I was building a timeline. 2 weeks later, the HOA made their biggest mistake. They held a public meeting where Karen triumphantly announced that after legal review, they had full authority to begin daily fines of $250 and possible legal action. A neighbor sent me a recording. I was amused. She didn't mention that their legal review consisted of a misreading of a 15-year-old HOA map that had been superseded by newer zoning designations. I decided it was time to act. The next day, I printed a large-scale satellite image of the lake, annotated with property boundaries from the county GIS system, highlighted my parcel in red, and dropped it off at the HOA clubhouse. During office hours.
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
HOA clubhouse. During office hours. I attached a certified letter stating that as legal deed holder to the lake and adjacent parcel including their Clubhouse foundation, I was issuing a formal cease and desist against all attempts to fine, remove, or otherwise interfere with my property, including, but not limited to, my dock, my boat, and my water rights. I added a note at the bottom that said, "Failure to comply may result in restricted access to the Clubhouse dock until this matter is settled." And then I waited. Within hours, I got a phone call not from Karen, but from the HOA's treasurer, a mild-mannered man named Dave, who had probably joined the board thinking it'd be about potlucks and landscaping budgets. Dave asked if we could talk. I invited him over. We sat on my deck, watching ducks glide across the lake. I handed him a manila folder full of property deeds, annotated maps, and copies of the old zoning decisions. His face changed as he flipped through them. "You own the lake?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "And the clubhouse?" "Technically, just the land under it, but close enough." Dave didn't say much after that. He took the documents and left. The next day, the signs on my dock vanished. The fines stopped. And Karen? She went silent. For now. But I knew this was only the beginning. When someone builds their entire identity around control, they don't back down after one loss, they regroup. But so did I. I had more than deeds and documents. I had patience. And the truth. And that's a far stronger anchor than any HOA can pull against. The war wasn't over. But the tide had turned and I had the current on my side. Over the next several weeks, Karen's passive-aggressive silence gave way to new tactics. Anonymous tips started landing with the county inspection office. One claimed I had constructed my dock illegally. Another accused me of polluting the lake with my boat's fuel. Each one was investigated and swiftly dismissed. My dock had been inspected and approved before Karen ever learned my name. My boat, a pristine electric cruiser, didn't even use gas. But the frequency of these complaints showed her desperation. She was trying to stir up trouble, to wear me down by volume if not substance. I responded the only way I knew, how methodically. I filed a formal inquiry with the HOA requesting all documentation they had ever used to determine lake jurisdiction. I knew they wouldn't find any. I also contacted the local recorder's office and submitted for a full title search of the HOA's common areas. I requested easement documentation and right of access agreements. The results were exactly what I expected. Nothing. Not a single document supported their claim over the lake or the clubhouse parcel. Their entire foundation rested on assumption, habit, and unchallenged bluster. The house of cards was swaying. At this point, some of my neighbors began quietly reaching out. People who had previously avoided eye contact at the mailbox now stopped during evening walks. "Hey," they'd say, cautiously. "Heard what's going on? Honestly, we're with you. Karen's been a nightmare for years." It wasn't a flood of support, but the trickle felt good. It meant people were paying attention. It meant the narrative was shifting. I didn't just want to win this battle. I wanted to free the entire neighborhood from this nonsense. So I began preparing something bigger, a full presentation. Using maps, deeds, zoning overlays, and even drone footage, I created a comprehensive breakdown of the lake's true ownership and how the HOA had been misrepresenting its power. I reached out to a few sympathetic board members and invited them to a quiet preview. When they saw it, jaws dropped. One even muttered, "We could get sued." I didn't say anything, just let the silence hang. It was clear they were realizing the extent of the problem. Then I scheduled time on the agenda for the next HOA general meeting. This was going to be public. It was time to flip the script entirely, and I was ready. The HOA meeting was scheduled for a Wednesday evening at the community center. And as I walked through the glass doors with my manila folder in one hand and a digital slideshow queued up on my tablet, I felt a mix of calm and fire building in my chest. I wasn't just here to defend my property. Anymore, I was here to expose the fragile foundations Karen and her cronies had built their little empire upon. As the board members took their seats in the front row, Karen perched like royalty in the center, smug and sure of herself. She wore a bright blue blazer and a look of bored disdain, like nothing anyone said could possibly threaten her power. The room was half full, mostly residents who were either long-time HOA loyalists or those curious about the recent murmurs they'd been hearing around the neighborhood. I introduced myself not with bravado, but with facts. I explained that I had spent months gathering documents, verifying records, and consulting with zoning experts. I displayed the satellite maps, overlaying property boundaries with current structures, showing in full clarity how the HOA had not only overstepped their authority, but built their prized clubhouse on land that didn't belong to them. Murmurs turned into gasps. A few attendees leaned in, whispering in disbelief. Karen interrupted, her voice tight and clipped, trying to undermine me with legal jargon and empty threats, but the documents were too precise, too legitimate to dismiss. I played an audio clip from a call with the county registrar confirming the land deed in my name, and when I showed the tax receipts and registered deed ID, the room went silent. Karen's face tightened. The board members looked at each other nervously. Then one of them, a newer appointee named Linda, asked a question that hung in the air like thunder. If we don't legally own the land under the clubhouse, do we even have the right to operate out of it? That one sentence cracked the dam. What followed was a flood of questions, revelations, and frustrations that had been simmering for years. Residents began standing up, voicing their own experiences of unjust fines, harassment, and favoritism. One elderly couple said they had nearly moved away after being threatened with foreclosure over a garden statue. Another revealed they'd been charged a bogus fee for repainting their home in a color that was actually pre-approved. The meeting transformed from a hearing into a reckoning. I didn't say much more after that. I let the facts do the talking, and the community carry the torch. By the end of the night, a motion was raised to suspend all enforcement actions pending a legal review of the HOA's authority. It passed by overwhelming majority. Karen looked like someone had pulled the rug out from under her throne. In the following weeks, the legal investigation accelerated. The county zoning department launched a formal review. The HOA's lawyer, clearly hired on a discount, resigned abruptly. Residents demanded an audit of the HOA's finances, and when the numbers came in, they told a grim story of misused funds, unrecorded expenses, and payouts to vendors suspiciously connected to Karen's family. A class action was whispered about. Karen was removed from her position by a board vote just 6 weeks after that fateful meeting. The clubhouse was temporarily shuttered pending the resolution of its land ownership, which I was more than willing to lease to the community under fair, transparent terms, something Karen never offered anyone. I became a reluctant leader, someone neighbors turned to with questions, advice, and support. I never wanted power. I only wanted peace and fairness. But if the price of that peace was helping my community rebuild from within, I was ready to pay it. And the board?
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
I was ready to pay it. And the board? It never moved. It stood there as a quiet symbol of standing one's ground. Not just mine, but everyone's who had ever been silenced, fined, or bullied by people who thought control was more important than respect. The lake was quiet again. Not with the false quiet of intimidation, but with the true quiet of people living without fear, neighbors waving with sincerity, and a breeze that carried laughter instead of threats. The HOA was restructured. Term limits were implemented. Transparency became policy. And I, finally, was free to take my boat out at dawn, alone with the rising sun, knowing the war was over and we had all won. But as peaceful as it now felt, getting to this point hadn't been a simple victory. The Pate was a slow-burning revolution born from quiet resilience and smart planning. After the meeting, I had spent weeks documenting the HOA's prior violations. I worked with a legal advocate who specialized in homeowner rights and class action suits. He was intrigued by how deep the mismanagement had gone. Together, we compiled over 200 pages of complaints, invoices, contractor payments, and meeting minutes that showed clear favoritism and misuse of authority. These weren't just administrative hiccups, they were coordinated efforts to squeeze residents for more fees, while Karen and her circle lived comfortably with double standards. The residents who had long grumbled in whispers were now speaking loudly. One neighbor, George, who had kept to himself for years, organized a community truth nightie, where people came forward and aired grievances. We met in a local barn, brought our own chairs and snacks, and talked for hours. People wept. People shouted. And for the first time, people listened. It became a regular thing. A newsletter followed. A new board election was called. I didn't run for a seat, but I helped vet candidates, folks who believed in fairness, transparency, and actual community. When election day came, Karen's hand-picked successors were all voted out. The Clubhouse, after some negotiation and a lease I personally drafted, was reopened with public oversight and regular audits. What once was a symbol of HOA tyranny became a hub for shared growth. Yoga classes, movie nights, and weekend brunches with local vendors sprang up where once citations were printed. More importantly, a community bulletin was established with open contributions. And my role? I slipped into the background. I answered questions when asked, kept my dock tidy, and hosted the occasional cookout. But I made sure never to turn into what I had fought against. One afternoon, as I was cleaning the boat's trim, a boy from down the street came up and asked if I had really owned the lake like a boss. I laughed, patted his shoulder, and told him, "No, son, I just protected what was mine. That's what real strength is." The boy nodded like he'd been handed a secret. And maybe he had. Because the truth is, no matter the paperwork or titles or deeds, what we really hold on to is the spirit of our space. When you protect that, when you guard your peace and empower others to do the same, when communities thrive. Not under fear, but with pride. And that little lake, that quiet water, became a symbol not just of ownership, but of something deeper. We had reclaimed more than land we'd reclaimed ourselves. And the ripples of that win would carry through generations. That was my legacy. Not a boat or a plot or a letter, but a stand that changed everything.